Alan runs this climate book club, and I want, Marianne came up with a suggestion that we have the book club here presenting some books, and I thought it was a very good suggestion. Alan Webb runs this book club, but Alan did invite 6 different people to come and present a book apiece. And so I said, since he runs the book club, he can run that portion of this meeting. All right. We will leave time for question and answers at the end. And so, Alan, if you're ready to take it over, it's all yours.
Thank you, Nikki, and thank you, Marianne. Well, first, by the way, Kalamazoo Climate Crisis Coalition, this is your book group. It's actually jointly sponsored by the KCCC and the Western Michigan University Climate Change Working Group. I'm facilitating it, but I don't think I'd even go so far as that topic. I would say that it's really a terrific group because it includes such a variety of people, from climate scientists to concerned citizens, and people with many other interests and places in between, and activists such as many of you guys. And we meet once a month, and we meet on Zoom. And I have an email list, and the email list has well over 150 people on it. And many people let me know that they just get the email. They'd love to go to a meeting once in a while, and they do sometimes drop in, but also they read the book, even if they're not coming to the group. So, and you're not, being on the email list does not obligate you to anything, except opening the email if you want. If you're not on the climate change book group email list and you would like to be, just send me your email address, and I'll add you to the reading the book group reading list. I don't know how anybody could choose their favorite climate change book, because there's so many great ones, and the reading group's been going on now for, I don't know, at least 8 years, or maybe more than that even. And we have in my email, I send out a link that shows all the books we've read, and we've invited many authors to come, and they've joined us, and that's been a really rich, interesting experience. I could name some famous people that have been part of our discussions. I have a book I want to suggest, but I want to let other people go first. So I don't have an official order here. Is there somebody who would like to be first to give their book talk and get us excited about it?
Well, I will, Alan. I'll jump in. So first of all, briefly introducing myself, I'm Tim Tesser, local Kalamazoo climate activist with the Kalamazoo Climate Crisis Coalition and the Citizens Climate Lobby. And the book that I had a hard time choosing, but what I'm going to choose is to share is this book, which hopefully you can see, called Climate Justice by Mary Robinson. And Mary Robinson, I'm just going to read briefly here. Mary Robinson is president of a foundation. She served in 2 capacities as United Nations Secretary General's Special Envoy on Climate, and she is the former and first female president of Ireland. She's a climate activist on a global scale. And we read this book quite some time ago, 2018, I think, was one of the early books. I have since recommended it many times. We keep it on our table when we're tabling at the farmer's market or whatever. And I will recommend it to people, as if people ask me, what book would you recommend? I say this book, because it's a very easy to read, in the sense that it's a collection of stories of individuals around the world who were affected by climate change and became activists on that issue. And what made it particularly significant to me, and I think others in the community, is that Mary Robinson was doing a book tour, and members, I don't know who, but particularly maybe Alan or Paul Clemens, managed to snag her to come to Kalamazoo. So Mary Robinson actually came to Kalamazoo. She gave a talk in the Dalton Recital Hall in the music school building, which was pretty well attended. And then and that was amazing enough. But then she joined us for lunch at the Indian restaurant here, Saffron. And I felt deeply honored to have an opportunity to interact directly face to face with such an important person in the climate space. So all of that's what made this book particularly memorable for me. And I will continue to promote and recommend it to people. It's a good place to start in addressing the climate issue. And I'll leave it at that, unless there's any questions.
Thank you, Tim. You know, one great thing about that book is it really has a diverse, international, multi-ethnic set of activists that it talks about, and some of their stories are, as you say, very compelling, and the first person nature of it makes it all the more appealing, I think. It was Paul Clements who actually did most of the legwork to bring her, but I was one of a number of people who got to spend a bunch of time with her, and I think that bringing up Mary Robinson to me leads to Joe's book he's going to talk about, because there's perhaps the main character of Joe's book is built entirely around Mary Robinson, and so it was almost eerie for me reading this book Joe's going to talk about, because the character, the way she's portrayed, this is a novel, is so close to the way that she came across in person that it was really quite interesting and kind of fun in a way. So it gave an extra piece. But I'm sorry, I don't want to take over your conversation, Joe. Why don't you go next?
No, you guys just added to my knowledge of the book that I'm supposed to pitch, because I didn't know that the heroic middle-aged female bureaucrat in the Ministry for the Future was based on Mary Robinson. And I'm also now, I had sort of assumed that it was based on Kim Stanley Robinson's wife. So Kim Stanley Robinson is the author of the book that I'm pitching here, which is called The Ministry for the Future. And he mentions at some point that his wife is a female bureaucrat. So now I'm wondering, like, is his wife the president of Ireland? I don't know. I'm gonna look that up when we're done with this, and I'm gonna assume not, but maybe. Anyway, The Ministry for the Future is my favorite climate change book, because it takes the approach of what if we get it right, and how could we get it right, and it does it from a fictional standpoint. I mean, there's another book literally called What If We Get It Right, that's nonfiction, but this one is fiction, and it's just got so many great ideas on just a variety of topics presented in an entertaining way. So, you know, it's got cryptocurrency reimagined in a climate-friendly way. It's got rewilding the planet, and what might that look like? It's got you know, travel reimagined in a climate-friendly way. It's got a little violence reimagined in a climate-friendly way. It's got a lot of different things. It's just a generally entertaining and excellent book, as you would expect. The author is an extremely successful science fiction writer. And this is, I've read some interviews with the author, and he kind of says, this is the book where I took like all my other ideas from all my other books, and I combined it in this book. And he's actually said, I don't think I've got anything else to say about climate change now. So his next book after this one is about like hiking in the Sierra Nevada mountains. Anyway, it's just a great book. Smart, entertaining, inspiring, and I think everybody would enjoy it and get a lot out of it. Thank you.
I'm stepping in my powerful role here as a conversation facilitator, and I want to say even a little more about this fabulous book. These are both really terrific books that Joe's brought up. The Ministry for the Future became, soon after it came out, it became part of the whole national, maybe even international discussion of climate change. It was referred to by all kinds of leading people. I think it's been referred to by the head of the United Nations, Gutierrez from Portugal. And part of the reason is that the opening chapter, which this book it's a long book, but the chapters are all short and they're easy to read. And there's all kinds of, like Joe says, all kinds of climate dimensions and things in there. But the opening chapter describes, maybe you didn't want to give this away, but describes a heat wave in India, a heat wave from which, in the novel, 20 million people die. And you read this chapter and you learn more about it, and it's sort of a question of not exactly could this happen, but when is this going to happen? And then by some almost tremendous work of the imagination, the novel finds its way to a future that addresses and begins to turn around the climate crisis and reduce greenhouse gas emissions and so forth. And that story is such a vital story for us to face the real horror that climate change presents, at the same time to show us that there's a pathway to not go to that horror if we can, you know. Anyway, yeah, Ministry for the Future. Who else has got a book? Can we top those two? I don't know.
Well, I can talk next. I second Tim's recommendation of Climate Justice. I bought probably 20 copies of that book for two different book groups that I thought were not focused on climate change, but perhaps ought to be focused on climate change. And this was a gentle way into the issue for them because it tells human stories. In addition to two book groups, I bought a copy for Representative Upton and his wife. My focus primarily is on climate policy, so I really appreciate books that look at climate policy making. And I might recommend 5 Times Faster, which we read rather recently, but I think it could have been 5 times shorter in making the key point that getting the right people together at the right time, that is people who share a common threat and who have power and are willing to share the risk together at the same time, is a good way to go. But what I'm going to focus on instead is another book that I bought a copy of for a representative, and that's this book by Michael Méndez, Climate Change from the Streets, with a rather lengthy subtitle, How Conflict and Collaboration Strengthen the Environmental Justice Movement. The office that I bought it for was the office of Rashida Tlaib, and I sent it to her aide. And I did that because I knew that she was opposed to carbon pricing, which has two different subtypes, cap and trade and a carbon fee and dividend model. I support a carbon fee and dividend model. I never warmed to the notion of a cap and trade, which Méndez calls a cap and trade-off. And he influenced my thinking, solidified my thinking about the reason I don't support that in talking about cap and trade-offs. Let me give you a couple of examples. When we have a carbon trade-off, buying land in the UP to provide forests and allow instead the pollution of a California community to continue, that's not justice. That's injustice. When we buy land in South or Central America that was well managed by an indigenous group and instead plant it with a monoculture of trees, that's not justice, that's injustice, and that doesn't solve the climate crisis. He also helped me to understand that putting all of our eggs in one basket, that is, we're trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in a molecular level to reduce the heat, and we ignore the real timely problems, health problems that individuals living in frontline communities are experiencing, then we don't have a full picture of what we need to be doing to solve the climate crisis. So he helped influence my thinking about climate policy in that way. His book's been recognized by other groups. For example, I should say that it's developed as a series of case studies about work that's done in California, that was done in California before becoming an academic, and he's now at the University of California at Irvine. He was a policy maker. He was a lobbyist. He was appointed by the governor to a commission that worked on establishing California's climate policy, which is internationally recognized. But I was about to say that other groups have recognized the quality of this book. The International Studies Association gave it the Sprout Award as the best book in the field of international environmental studies and politics, one that makes a contribution to theory and interdisciplinarity, shows rigor and coherence in research and writing, and offers accessibility and practical relevance. And the Association for Humanist Sociology gave it the McClung Lee Award as the best book in the field of humanist sociology that seeks to uncover and address social issues, working with others to lessen the pain of social problems. Additionally, the book is listed by the United Nations Foundation as one of the Climate Books for Change movement. We were able to have the author, Michael Méndez, join us a couple years ago in the March Climate Emergency Month, and you can find on KCCC's YouTube a recording of a panel discussion between two Michigan climate justice advocates and activists and Michael Méndez, led by WMU Professor. Yeah, I've got it written down because as I age, my brain shuts down. Sibel Shattuck. More recently, he's done work on disparate impacts of wildfires on undocumented migrants. He was quoted last month by the British newspaper The Guardian talking about the folly of Trump's releasing of all of the California water levies and the impact that has had on people. So he's a good scholar, he's a good activist, he's making practical applications of his work.
That's terrific, a terrific report, Marianne. And I have to say that book did profoundly influence me also, and I think it's a great recommendation. Who would, particularly on the topic of environmental justice? I mean, climate change and environmental justice, which as you described, go hand in hand, and he brings those together in a really compelling way, doesn't he? Who would like to go next? Susan, no one's read more. I've read a lot of climate books, but I think you read. I know you read more. Do you want to? And how could you pick? Do you want to go next?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Yes, as many of you know, I have long maintained an annotated list of about 50 of my favorites in climate change and sustainability. I will make a link to that list available. It's on my own book website. I wrote a book too. And I just updated it a couple of days ago after I summarized my book. I picked my favorite book from about my last year of reading. Like Ellen said, yeah, I read a lot. I've read certainly several hundred climate change and sustainability books, but this one really stands out And it made a big splash in Europe, not so much in the US. I think that's really unfortunate. It's called The Best of Times, The Worst of Times, Futures from the Frontiers of Climate Science, which I don't think is a real good subtitle, actually. It's more like Futures in Climate Action. It's by Professor Paul Behrens, who's a academic in the Netherlands in environmental sciences. And I'll start out by reading my short summary and my annotated list. A brilliant readable work of scholarship for the bigger picture, alternates pessimistic chapters with more optimistic ones. People alive today have the gift and burden of choosing. The barriers are real. Can they be overcome? Covers many angles, organized around sections on climate science, energy, food, economics, and progress on population and development. Highly recommended, and I don't say that lightly. All the books on my list I recommend, but this one really stands out. He does such a good job with the scholarship, and yet, like I said, it is readable, and the breadth. This will make you really have a different perspective on all these issues that go into the climate crisis and solving it. And if I still have a couple minutes left, I'd like to read snippets from my notes, because for the better books, I have long kept a document with notes and with page numbers of the things that especially struck me. And for this book, it's several pages long. So yeah, I won't have time to go over all of them, but just some of the high points here to give you an idea of the scope here. It is definitely a bigger picture book, but it covers a lot of ground. Okay, so of course he goes into the fact that this is an issue of consumption. That's right toward the beginning of the book in the developed nations. As many of us know on this call, the richest 10% are globally responsible for nearly half of emissions. He points out with documentation, again, tons of references for this book, if the top 10% would keep their greenhouse gas emissions down to the level of the average European, the current level of the average European, we would cut global emissions by a third. Yeah, so consumption is the problem. Inequality is at record highs in the US. Again, documented here, richest of 400 families in the US apparently pay a tax rate lower than the working class in the US. Most people globally say they want a more sustainable world, even with less economic growth. He has a nice section on the position of women. As those of you who've read the bestseller Drawdown know, that was one of the top methods recommended in that book to bring greenhouse gas emissions down. More education and power for women and girls. All the net positives from migration, pay taxes but use fewer public services, all documented. Air pollution from fossil fuels, energy security issues, subsidies for fossil fuels, good on nuclear and its current limitations, has a nice section on that. It notes all the advantages of solar and wind, and also cites research showing that yes, they have the total magnitude needed for our energy supply globally. Wind alone could cover 10 times our current energy use. This is global. Solar could cover it 15 times, referencing Vaclav Smil. Those of you in the area may be familiar with this name. He's well known for energy issues. The growth rate of renewables, of course, has been phenomenal. That needs to continue. Okay, more on that. He's good on e-bikes, which not everyone is, decarbonizing cities. I mean, again, this whole book's on all these other issues, and somehow he gets to the nub, and these great citations for all these areas and brings it all together. He notes famine is growing recently, climate change and related strife due in part to climate change is a major cause. It cites the FAO report on that. Good on problems with eating meat, cattle in particular, also pigs and sheep, which I didn't know as much about. 80% of ag land, again, I think this is globally, is used for livestock, real problem. Cattle farming is the largest driver of bird biodiversity loss. That's according to a study in Nature Ecology, which I didn't know. Amazon deforestation for cattle, a lot of people know. 80% of the soy grown in the Amazon is for animal feed. Okay, suggests taxing meat. Even the EU which is doing better than the US, is still subsidizing meat and dairy. Subsidy reform is critical. He calls for ending all the monopolies. Those of you not familiar with Zephyr Teachout's book, Break 'em Up. That's all about monopolies in the US mainly. They're all over our economy. It's a huge problem. He has actual good summaries of solutions, including things like encouraging, groceries to sell wonky vegetables. And in fact, there are programs on this elsewhere, like in Europe, where he's from, fines and food rescue groups, things like that. Should I stop there or go on? It gives you an idea anyway.
I think you've done a wonderful job
Yeah.
pulling a lot of pieces out of that book. It sounds like it's going to be encyclopedic, and it's
But readable. It's readable too. It's not stodgy like some of the other,
So that was called Best of Times, Worst of Times,
the
Best of
best
Times?
of times, the worst of times. I am so sorry. It
Okay.
did not make more of an impact in the US. I don't remember now who recommended it to me, but its turn came up and I am so glad I read it. Again, out of all the books I've read over the course of the last year, which is a lot, this one really stood out.
Okay.
Right, that's a great recommendation, and of course, everybody knows right away that he's stolen the title
Yeah.
from Charles Dickens. I'm just going to point that out as an English professor here. I guess that leaves John and I to bring up a book, right? Is that right? If I, John, do you want to let me go last? Are you willing to
Okay,
talk about?
sure, I'll talk now. My brief talk is really directed towards people who weren't part of the climate change book group this last go around. It's a book that we just finished reading called What If We Get It Right? By Ayana as Elizabeth Johnson, who's a climate scientist. The focus is really on what ifs for a lot of people. It starts off with her showing her total awareness of the extent of the hole that we've dug ourselves into environmentally, and it's could be seen as exhaustive if not if it wasn't buttressed with all of these amazing stories that include essays and poetry and conversations that I haven't read the whole book, and I certainly haven't read as many books as on this subject as most of the other people here talking. But for someone like me, who's kind of an outsider looking in more than at the center of working to obstruct any more climate change, I would say it's very readable. It goes from different themes that kind of bounce around. They have there's a lightness to them and a lot of substance to the topics that they cover. The poetry is a nice break. There's some art as well. So she's real eclectic about how she brought this together. Some examples: Judith Schwartz, the climate scientist, she's in a section called Replenish and Regreen. She talks a lot about biodiversity and restoring the world's ecosystems and the importance of water. And the whole thing for her is like we have to like think in terms of hope and the future and get our heads around this downward spiral that we're on mentally. I got a couple of architects, Brian Donahue and Leah Penniman. Donahue talked about the importance of building rural communities, bringing people back to farms. Leah talks a lot about the transition that was tragic for Black Americans and how they were by 1910, they had peaked at owning farms in America, and it's been downhill ever since. And so there's a kind of climate justice aspect to her to what she's talking about. She talked about seeds and farming in new ways. She tells a touching story about how during the Great Migration from Africa, how women in particular brought seeds with them, and how that metaphor really is a powerful metaphor when it comes to talking about how climate change can be halted with incremental steps that are consistent and forceful. I'm going to quote her. She said, "The seed is a bundle of genetic promise, how to coax more food and more joy and more life from the earth and fixing our food system. Certified to be organic." She climaxes that quote with "go big or get out." So she's not pussyfooting. She talks about Black-owned community land trusts, love the earth back, treat farm workers fairly, and return the land. So she's very much in favor of I don't know if it's what's reclamation or recompensating the Black landowners in America, and what can be done in terms of letting them back into rural communities in a way that they haven't been for generations. So another architect, Paolo Antonelli, talking about design, he says that it doesn't solve problems or give form to function to talk about design, but it does change behavior. So, and that reminded me of a talk that I went to a month ago at the end of January here in Kalamazoo from a guy named Charles Montgomery, who talked about a book he wrote called Happy City. And a lot of his examples were about how, and he used Kalamazoo as an example of how if you change the environments in which people live, it changes their behavior, and it can go in either one of two directions, either towards alienation or towards community. So let me see, anything else?
The time is.
Time is up. Okay. Got it. Okay. So for those of you who already read the book, it's rehashed, but hopefully for the rest of you, it's well worth reading.
And I didn't feel like you were rehashing. I felt you were illuminating, and so that was great. I haven't read the book, but those were good comments, John, and your enthusiasm for it, is contagious. I didn't know what the heck book to talk about. I thought to myself, this particular group knows a lot about climate change already. If I was talking to people that were just trying to learn about the science, I'd think of either the book Our Final Warning by Mark Linus, or the book This Fragile Moment by Michael Mann, which really takes us into the present and goes through a real history of climate study itself, but it just lets us know more about the state of our climate. And this is the book I'm going to suggest is more general than some of the other really good specific books. There's a couple of books about climate migrants. We read a book that I think is quite powerful, Nomad Century. And I just finished another book called On the Move by Abraham Lustgarten that's about climate migration within the United States, primarily. And like Marianne, I was thinking about the book 5 Times Faster, which is, I think, a very good book for people who are quite involved in climate activism. And that's also why I picked this book that I'm going to talk about, which is The Language of Climate Politics. And our group did read this not that long ago. I'm actually teaching it this semester, and I haven't started. I'll be teaching it starting, next week is spring break, but after that, we'll be reading this book. And the subtitle is Fossil Fuel Propaganda and How to Fight It. So this book is going to talk a lot about how we talk about climate change in a way that is both accurate and effective. But it also turns out by reading it, you get a real updated understanding of the whole climate crisis and what's going on and what are the real issues, what are the real things that need to be addressed and done. So for me, it wasn't, maybe this is a stupid thing for an English professor to say, but it wasn't just about language. It was about the issues with climate change. I was struck immediately by the foreword, or the preface. There's a preface, then an introduction, but the preface is just like 2.5 pages long, but it's all about the use of the word "we" you know, we cause climate change. What are we going to do about it? Things like that. And I think that was a very important piece of understanding about who really is, how do we take responsibility for climate change and how do we go forward? And she takes this particular, like these 3 sentences. I'm going to read you these 3 sentences, and then the whole book basically unpacks these 3 sentences and why they're a completely inadequate way to talk about climate change. The sentences are: yes, climate change is real, but calling it an existential threat is just alarmist. And anyway, phasing out coal, oil, and gas would cost us too much. Human flourishing relies on the economic growth enabled by fossil fuels, so we need to keep using them and deal with climate change by fostering technological innovation and increasing our resilience. Besides, America should not act unilaterally on climate crisis while emissions are rising in India and China. So that's a kind of argument that's used against, you know, taking immediate action on fossil fuels and really, you know, going after the climate change. And a lot of it is familiar. It's familiar to a lot of people. Of course, part of the reason it's familiar is because it's basically the lines used now by the fossil fuel industry and their backers who or their paid flunkies, however you look at it, I guess, that are politicians and so forth. The book feels very relevant given the rise of the Trump administration and all the totally nefarious things they're doing right now with promoting fossil fuels and undermining any kind of climate efforts. And this book can help you really analyze and explain that to people. So those words, the words that are the chapter titles of the rest of the book are key words in that passage I read. Alarmist is one, cost is another, growth is another, and innovation and resilience. And through the course of it, and India and China. And she shows each of those assumptions about behind those words to be completely wrong. I think that under alarmist, for example, she talks about 4 or 5 different schools for thinking about climate change, alarmist being only kind of one of them. And that categorization of different approaches to thinking about climate change really influenced my understanding of how to think about, of how we all tend to think about climate change. Um, and without going into too much detail more, she does say that China, for example, has done more to develop the renewable energy that we need and is taking strides. India, too, taking tremendous strides, far better strides than America's been taking to address climate change. So that this is a kind of a canard, this argument about how, well, they're not doing anything, so why do we need to worry? You know, why should we do something, basically?
Well, what we're going to do is actually turn it over right now to anybody have any specific questions. I would just like to throw out here that this is a fantastic group. It really, the breadth of the books that we read, as you can see, it goes from fiction to some really policy types of books. It gives you a background that under normal circumstances, unless you were in university, you wouldn't get. And fortunately, we do have a few people from university in there, so that's, I think, how we are getting the breadth of the books that we're getting. And so I would recommend, even if you don't join this group, but maybe get on the mailing list, find out what books there are being. Alan always says you don't have to read the book to attend. You can listen to the discussion. You can ask questions based on the discussion. And so this is an actual plug for the book club because the broadening of my mind from reading these books has really been, it got me out of the local and really into the breadth of the problem, but also the breadth of the solutions. There's a lot that we can be doing. And I would like to say that in ministry for the future, the Robinson character has an assistant, and the assistant does not above board activity while she keeps all of her activities above board. So that might have to be one of the ways that we're also fighting the powers that be.
Rex, the Black Wing, right?
Right. And so it's something that when you're reading the book, you keep that in mind too, because that clandestine might be essential. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out because it was a good portion of the book. Yes, Susan.
Yeah, in that vein, I'd like to recommend a book that's a good introduction, especially for families, although it doesn't have to be for parents. But this is the one we made available at our tabling events for Climate Action Coalition in the Central Valley of California that I co-founded and co-chaired. And we found it to work very well for that purpose. It's Mary DeMacker's book, Parents' Guide to Climate Revolution, which is, believe it or not, funny. You wouldn't think that would be possible. Very short chapters, inspiring examples, great stories, wonderful. It's 100 ideas that, families can do, adults, kids, again, it's not just for parents, but very, very accessible, goes over the basics and has great recommendations, and it's empowering. And again, so just if anyone knows someone who wants to start reading about this, and certainly, especially if they have kids, then that's one that I can recommend that I've gotten a lot of great feedback on. Sierra Club recommended it too, by the way.
Who the author is? Mary?
Oh yeah, the author is Mary DeMacker, DeMocker, Parents' Guide to Climate Revolution.
The way that the book group picks its books is that the people that attend at the end of the conversation pick the next book. And I've had a lot of suggestions that we put our book list together for 6 months in advance or something like that, which is a great idea too. That's another way to do it, which I see the value of. But I have to say, I do like the fact that the people who actually come decide what the book is going to be. So if you participate, then even if it's your first time, you're welcome to share your thoughts. And sometimes it's a single individual who presses for a book that gets us to say, okay, yeah, we'll do that one. So I will say there are a couple books that maybe more than that I've wanted the book group to read that I've never been able to convince the book group to read. Which is just fine, because I can't enforce my will on the book group. But I can enforce it on my students. I get them to read. This is where the power comes in. I can mention a couple of those. One book that I've been that I brought up a couple times is How to Blow Up a Pipeline. I guess people don't really want to go out and blow up a pipeline. Oh, there's a movie about that too, basically. But and you might get some serious, doo-doo if you were to do that, by the way. But that book is really not about how to blow up a pipeline. It's about civil disobedience and its role in a broader movement. Anyway, so that's kind of an interesting book. Another book that I can't convince anybody to read this is great. Books I can't convince people to read. This one's called Green Rising, which is a young adult climate fiction book. It's a really very creative and innovative sort of look at how young people can transform the climate emergency. And it's obviously inspired by Greta Thunberg and others, but it also has a magical realist dimension to it. And it has an Elon Musk character who is trying to go to Mars and becomes central to the whole battle, that takes place in the novel. So this is more like when you've really just had a freaking enough and you want to throw something against the wall. Do you know what I mean? And put yourself in a different mindset. Green Rising. Just saying. Okay. I got that. Got my little deal over there.
Anybody else have anything to say at this point?
One thing the Green New Deal, really sets forward is that we have to address issues of inequality if we're going to adequately solve the climate crisis. Because the way if you have an oligarchy or a plutocracy or a kleptocracy, uh, have you ever gone by the few, by the rich, or by the crooks? You're not going to be able to get the change you need. And so, plus, not to mention the fact that, of course, we want to live in a world where everyone has got opportunity. I'm very interested in the problem of climate change and undocumented immigrants and other immigrants. And I've been working recently to support undocumented people in our community. And I think that we have to understand that a lot of those people are here with some climate dimensions to their being here, from southern Mexico or Central America, where there's been terrible droughts, or even from
And
Africa and the Middle East, where there have been climate impacts. That's not the only reason, but those climate impacts are part of a broader social
Well,
breakdowns that are taking place.
those kind of things also lead to more violence. I mean, psychologically, heat leads to violence. And so when you start having the inequalities based on climate, the droughts, the floods, in Bangladesh, when you get 100 million people who are flooded, and then the floods go down and they try to rebuild, well, eventually they're going to have to all move. And what's the world going to do with these climate refugees is one of those big questions that has not truly been even addressed by anybody yet. And we know it's going to have to happen. And the longer we put it off, at least put off thinking about it and how we can start addressing it, the worse it's going to get. And that's around the world. We have those problems. Australia is going through a terrible drought that, how often do we hear about it? Until there's a wildfire, and then we'll hear about the wildfire, but we don't hear about the drought causing problem. So it's worldwide as climate changes and people are having problems adapting to their areas. A lot of what they called the Arab Spring uprisings a lot of that was because of the heat and the droughts that were happening at the time. And so it's going to just lead to more of that.
Anne had her hand up there for a second, Nikki.
well, I have a few comments about migration, and one is I heard a Northern Illinois University talk by someone who studies migration. She said most migrants only move next to the country next door or move within an area of their own country. So, but as climate change continues, they're going to have to move in greater distances. But I lived in Bangladesh for 3 years, and I think we in the United States have no idea how densely populated that country is and the problems they have when there are floods. We were flooded severely twice. And the rivers change course. I mean, they're trying to build bridges over some of the areas of Bangladesh, but it's a big delta, like Louisiana, and that's the entire country. And as those rivers change, people lose their land because then it's covered by a river and before was dry land. And so it does the issue of where they can go um, is tremendous. And I lived in Indonesia, and Eastern Indonesia, the people have a term of the time of famine. So every year there's a time of famine. And I mean, the Indonesian government now sends food to these outer islands, but as the climate changes, their ability to live in on those outer islands is going to make it almost impossible for them to stay there. So, you know, the idea of closing our borders to refugees is ridiculous, because as the climate heats up, all the countries that have a more mild climate, like you know, the U.S., are going to be destinations for people who are so desperate.
Right.
Anyway, you know, I lived the experiences, so
And your testimony is really powerful, and I appreciate your sharing it.
thank you.
Yeah, 'cause all we can do is read about it, really, you know,
One of the things you know so well from having lived there is that you can make dear friends. You can come to realize that we're all brothers and sisters on this planet, and
Oh,
we have to find a way to share this precious tiny planet. And this Mars is not going to work out. I'm sorry. There's a few problems, like no oxygen, no soil, no, it's extreme cold. I mean, we're
no gravity.
we're we're evolved for this spot, and
Mhm.
we need to do everything we. And by the way, as we know, it's a gorgeous planet we live on, and we have to figure out how we're going to save our planet and work with each other, take it and try to all be together. I mean, I know I'm just preaching to the choir here, but I guess I sound like a preacher maybe. But anyway, that's what I think, and I think that living abroad helps you become even more conscious of that.
Absolutely.
So thank you, Nikki and Marianne, for organizing this group. I think it's just such an important part of everything that we do around here. So
okay, so yeah, it's 1:07. It's well past our 1 o'clock. So unless there's any urgent business, I thank you all for being here, and we'll see you again in the future.